Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
It is. It's Pete. He's here.
On today's episode, we have invited cinematographer and filmmaker Andrew Wonder to talk about Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, a movie he likes. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to talk about this film and to be here with you guys. It's such a great collection of crew members and artists that you've amassed over the time you guys have been making this show.
Thank you so much. It's always great when you open a conversation with us that we've already interviewed someone who's a friend of yours. It's just the world's getting smaller every day. We love it. This is perfect.
It's just so true. Well, and we're just excited to talk with creatives and people in the industry because there's, everyone's out there working on so many different projects, but we're all also movie lovers. And I think that's the thing that it's nice to be reminded of, that we're here because there was probably some movie we saw when we were a kid that said, I want to do that,
Yeah.
No, totally. I was just at a film festival in Rome, New York of prints of silent pre-code films.
Wow.
And after going to Cannes and after being in all these festivals, Canada, it was my first time in a long time being in a festival with no one trying to sell anything. Everyone who made those movies is way dead, and it was just like love of the game filmmaking for a weekend, and it's exactly that way because it's at some point this nourished us, and it nourished us enough in the face of everything else in our lives to make us pursue it. And so if we don't go back to the nourishment, like what are we creating?
Yeah,
For
exactly.
sure.
Great way to put it. Well, let's talk a little bit about you and how you got started. Like, what were those moments that were in your life when you were young that kind of triggered a little response in your head that said, I might want to go in that direction?
It's funny. I always liked movies. I always liked creating, but I was one of those kids who didn't know what he wanted to do, didn't know what he was good at. High school, I remember middle school, high school theater was kind of fun. I played a little bit with my parents' mini DV camera. Then I was always interested in that stuff. But then when I was 17, I had the opportunity to work for MTV on a show called Made. And I left my senior year of high school, and I was traveling around the country, meeting high school students, filming them, making the show, getting eaten alive by executives and being given crazy notes, But it was I went to film school after, and I've shot movies. I've worked on all this stuff, but I'm always surprised how much I go back to the principles, because back then it was early reality, and it was more like the Maisel brothers or Pennebaker or single camera verite. You'd be in a school for weeks with kids. You record your own audio. You'd be in it, and there weren't a lot of trained filmmakers on the show, but I was young, so someone had to teach me.
Sure.
And I felt like the lesson I was always taught was that story and emotion is all that matters. It's like if you're there, if you're present, if you're alive, we would shoot 200 hours of tape for a 40 minutes episode. So you would have to every day turn dinner into a scene, turn breakfast into a scene. And it was such a great exercise in crafting emotion. And when I got to NYU after that, it was hard to find that same, the camera feeling like a participant, that same feeling of cinema. I think that's where cinematography became interesting to me in school. I had a lot of good mentors. Eventually I met Paul. I worked for this great cinematographer, Harris Savides. I would work for these people. I'd learn from them. I would teach them video cameras, and being there in the early 2000s when digital was so new and was so Wild West, it was just very exciting. And I think it really taught me a freedom that I sense of seeing, when it was so Wild West, when you were shooting on tape and no one ever be able to project it, or all these weird problems we were dealing with in formats. I feel like now things have kind of homogenized again. We still have film, we still have digital, but it's not as Wild West. And that fire is what I'm always looking for. That what I first got when I was 17, being in a place in transition, making eye contact, being present. And part of the reason why I picked this film actually was because it came to me later in my life, because so little of cinema that felt as present as it did when I was 17 existed. It was actually Paul Schrader who first showed me this film in my 30s. I probably ignored it in film school, and I don't know. It's amazing how, cinema's lifelong, right? Isn't it amazing how there's always new cinema to just fuel you? And so this was one that when I was 8. Could you imagine watching this when you're 8?
Oh my
And
God.
but then but in my 30s, living a little life, losing a little more.
Yeah.
I don't know. I saw freedom. I saw things. I saw not only what I aspired to do with a camera, but I saw freedom. And so I've always been looking for that my whole
Yeah.
career.
I think it's a really interesting thing. I want to pick up on something you said at the beginning of that statement, which was about missing some of the influence that you had on Made when you got to NYU, because I'm always sort of flagging conversations, particularly around DPs, where you have, like, there are DPs who recognize the value of the camera being a part of story, and there are DPs who recognize the technical achievement of capturing what the story is. And there's some line, some kind of gray area between the two. And so I'm curious your perspective. I mean, watching your stuff, it very much feels like you're in the room with people, and then you pick this movie that we're going to be talking about in a bit, which feels like the camera's so much a part of the conversation it's going to push people off the bed. And so I'm curious your take on what role camera has in narrative.
I think, from starting from a place, before YouTube and social media, when it really was just alone in the woods with a camera, uh, the lesson I took from it is that as a filmmaker, your most powerful tool is the emotional distance you put between your audience and subject. Like, this conversation is
Mm-hmm.
way different than this
Right.
conversation, even though my camera just decided it wasn't.
Right.
It wants you to be a part of the conversation. Don't worry.
And, and focal length, framing, I don't think any of it matters as much as that that physical distance decision. And so for me, it's like, again, it's what's beautiful about film is that we can have different intentions. One can be just Xeroxing other films. One could be waiting for inspiration, and we can get great films out of all of it. I'm an organic person. For me, it comes from eye contact. I think you shoot with your ears and your heart. By the time it's like a bullet, by the time you see it, the moment's already over. And so for me, that's how the camera paints. That's how it becomes a paintbrush, is being in those moments. It's funny, I've been building them again. My first films I made were with eyeglass cameras for this reason, because I love the feeling as a director that I could be here in a scene, and then when it got too intense, just get up and walk away for a minute and take a breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, there is the camera's relationship to subject is cinema to me, and using it because what is it? There's what's in the frame, there's what's the audience doesn't know is in, outside the frame, and what they think is outside the frame. And there's a lifetime of cinema in just those three tools.
What are your expectations when working with a director who has their own intentions around how to use the frame? I mean, do you bring the baggage of expectation that you are playing a certain role in that partnership, or is there do you work with directors who are like, please do what you're told?
I've had such a funny career in that way. I started working when I was so young after MTV. I was shooting features when I was at NYU for Michael Amareda, and I was shooting all sorts of stuff. And after school, I kind of quit it. I was early YouTube. A rapper threatened to kill me and my family. Paul Schrader was looking for someone to show him what the kids were doing. And I kind of quit cinematography to take this gig typing Paul's scripts from his basically word processor into the computer for him.
That's a different job.
Oh yeah, and you know what? It was the last writer's strike. I was a union camera assistant. I was shooting movies, and the strike was coming, and I was like, I don't know. I just wasn't enjoying it. I just wasn't finding the inspiration still. And when I took the job with Paul, I really started seeing it as art, and that's when I made Undercity. I would work for Paul all day, and I'd break into subway tunnels at night, and then I was doing parkour on the weekend, and it was a great time of freedom. And what I've really taken from it is that cinema is an act of service. We do this for ourselves, but we do it to communicate with the world. Like, we live in a time where nothing makes sense. We woke up in a future we don't understand. If there was ever a time for narrative to have an impact. It's like, who's going to tell us how to live, Elon Musk or the artist? It's really like
Yeah.
we're in a battle right now, whether we want to like keep making our industrialized content or not, and these next 10 years against the robots are really going to make a difference. So I think of this as an act of service, and I just want to make cinema that gives value back to cinema. I want this to live past my generation. I want people to love this. I want this to have form and value, forever. And so when I'm a cinematographer, it's honestly a relief because I shoot for myself, and so I'm used to doing both jobs. And so when I get the chance to actually support someone's vision, it's great to be the cinematographer I don't have, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
And work that way. And for me, it's really, I'm very lucky. I have a lot of experiences. I've been working since I was so young in so many different facets. I just try to give as much of it as I can to help aid that intention. Some filmmakers need more of it, some don't. Like Paul and I have such a specific relationship. It's different than the Kevin Bacon movie I just did versus when I shoot for people I've known for years. So that's the beauty of it, is that you don't learn when you're directing, but when you're shooting, you see the impact of decisions on the process. You see the impact of relationships to the process. So it's a long answer, but when it comes to it, that's where I look at it as what's the act of service I need to do to bring value to cinema in this role and relationship.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your about O Canada. This is the one that you most recently worked with Paul Schrader, and it's currently having its run right now. And I'm very curious to see this. I'm very curious to kind of check it out, because I think Paul can be such an interesting filmmaker in the way that he writes his scripts and tells his stories. What were some of the specifics as far as like in the conversations that you were having, as far as how you were going to go about capturing this specific vision for this film?
This was a funny one. Paul and I have been a part of each other's processes for almost half my life now. Since I started typing those scripts, we've co-directed films. We made a film for the Venice Film Festival that opened it. I've shot for him. I've done second unit. I've read all the scripts. I've been in the edits for a lot of these films, and so I've always been around these years. His last film to make it to Cannes, Dog Eat Dog, I worked on. I did a lot of work with him on it. I did the second unit, and so I've always been around. And he was moving back to New York. He moved back to Manhattan, and we'd reconnected. And I just made a documentary with a friend who had gotten a kidney transplant from his mom, and he didn't know how to say thank you or how to explain his guilt. So we made a film. It was very, we lived in it with him for a couple of days. I made that film.
Sure.
I sent it to Paul before the dinner, and I was like, Paul, I'm making this. And he runs into dinner with his assistant. He runs. He sends the TV. He's like, how would you do that? Did you cowboy that? Did you plan it? And I'm like, I don't know, Paul. I do. This is how I do it. And he was like, all right, I'm going to send you a script. How would you approach it? I was like, oh, I haven't had this conversation before. So he sent me the script to O Canada, which he was finishing adapting from Russell Banks's book. And I knew Russell, and I knew how close their relationship was.
Sure.
So I knew there was power to it. And when I read it, I saw a couple of things I hadn't seen in a Paul Schrader script before after reading them for 20 years, which is I saw him. Every time I'd read a Paul Schrader script, the second it got close to him, those pages were always gone before an audience saw it. And somehow I think Russell gave a gift of allowing, because they were friends, who's the filmmaker Russell knew. And I think that Russell, by grace or by accident, gave Paul a vehicle to express himself in a way that I hadn't seen before. It jumped around all these time periods, and it does all the stylistic stuff, which is very not in the Schrader, man in the room wheelhouse. It was part when I was helping him on Master Gardener and Posted. I kept saying, I was like, Paul, you wrote a 2-character story. You can't make it like a 1-character story anymore. And so when I saw that those challenges were coming for him visually, and I saw the emotional connection, I said, okay, there's something here. And so I came into dinner and I pitched him the aspect ratios, the black and white. I said, there's a language we can create to this. And, I honestly, with no expectation, I just thought I was helping my mentor out with like solving a problem.
Sure.
And just halfway through the dinner, he's like, "Why don't you shoot it?" I had just sold my commercial production company that I'd been directing at and running, and I was kind of at like a loss of faith in myself anyway in that moment. And it kind of felt like, well, I've been doing all this stuff, like you were saying, while we watch these movies, I've been doing all this to make a movie. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
never get to make another movie. And so when Paul gave the chance, I was like, all right, let me bring the fire. It's like, I know him as a person better than as a filmmaker. And so I said, all right, if I can bring the person, if I could just push this a little bit and bring the person I know. And then I
Hmm.
met Richard and we started doing makeup tests and I started seeing how much of himself he was bringing. I was like, all right, there's something here. It's like it's more human than what Paul's used to making, but that's what I do. I do the human stuff. And so it's like, all right, maybe that's the gift I can give back Paul is that I can give myself and I can give this side of me. And maybe that will allow a different side of him to come out. And that's part of what I think is what helped. There was a lot of us gunning that way,
Yeah.
and I think, but we have a very personal relationship. And so this was, this is accumulation of 20 years of my life doing this film with him.
Andrew, I feel like you tried to sneak something by us, and I want you to know I caught it.
Yeah.
You said you were at a point where you were in a crisis of faith yourself in your own place, and I'd like to hear more about that. You've created some wonderful work. Where did that come from? Because it makes O Canada sort of rehabilitative.
Oh, it was very cathartic. Rehabilitative is a great, because it really brought me back to movies. Uh, I had made a film, Feral. It was we went back into the subway tunnels for it. I was very proud of it. Had some tough producer problems, some tough distribution problems. It came out during the pandemic on. There was a
Mm.
Blackout Tuesday that was like where all media shut down to support Black Lives Matter, which
Yeah.
was a great cause, but an unfortunate day to have your film released.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Got it.
and I started a commercial production company with a partner, and commercials have become a bread and butter. It's hard. I mean, it's like Nepo babies come up for a reason. It's like if you don't come from this industry, if you don't come from the wealth, you have to build it. It was a hard fact I faced leaving film school trying to create, and so commercials were. Uh, After I worked for Paul, I taught high school for a year, and I came back so in debt. That's where I discovered commercial directing. It got me out of it. It got me my home. So I started this company to keep building a life. But honestly, it just took me away from the things I loved about movies. It was part the business relationship. It was part. Uh, I work in an eccentric way, and so I thought, oh, if I had 9 directors, imagine what we could do. And then when I discovered that not everyone works my way, and that not all my stuff is applicable to everyone, it was a
Mm.
great lesson as an artist.
Sure.
But so it was kind of after a few years, it just wasn't feeling right. The business relationship wasn't feeling right. I wasn't getting near films, and I don't know, I had to get out of it. I had done all this work to kind of creatively look at myself, uh, and so I just left my company and sold it back to my partner. And I just didn't know what I would do with myself. We went on a little trip. I just took a moment. And then this film came, and it was just, in a beautiful way because it was during the other writer's strike. If you think about it, like the first writer's strike brought me to Paul, the second one brought me back.
Yeah.
We were supposed to originally shoot this in June, and we shot it actually. I thought this was a great day because it's the day before we premiere at Toronto, but next week, next Wednesday is my birthday, and that was the first day of shooting we did on the film. So I
Wow.
spent from June to September just living in this world,
Yeah.
and I hadn't shot for anyone but myself in about a decade. So it was also like I feel like there's points in life where you're lucky enough to have the right combination of ignorance and experience.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I had a lot of experience from my bare knuckle filmmaking, but I had a certain ignorance of being back in a DP role with a big crew and these actors and everything else. So it really forced me to probably examine my job and be present in my job and do my prep in a way where I didn't know what question was going to come for me next because I hadn't done it before. So it's
Yeah.
just more about prepping myself with intention so that I could be prepared for the challenges. And it's like that's where I say it was cathartic, it was cumulative, And I feel like it really comes through on the screen too. And that's why I'm really proud to say I think we've really created a sensitive Paul Schrader film and something that's different for him, which is why it's had this world tour compared to the last few.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And from there, coming back into it after all of that and kind of, figuring yourself out, what do you want to do, having these conversations with Paul, working as DP on his film. You directed plenty of other things. Where are you at now? Are you like on a path where you're like, I'm really enjoying cinematography and I just want to dig in deep and do this? Or are you still wanting to kind of direct and be behind the camera in both ways as well?
I'm enjoying the spread, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was like cinematography was my original skill. I did it when I was 17. I shot features
Yeah.
when I was 19 and 20. Like, I don't know. Like, I think I started so young. By the time I was in my mid 20s, I was just over it the way you're over anything, that you've
Yeah.
been
Yeah,
doing for 10
sure.
years at that point. And so, in a way, it's been like reconnecting with like a spirit I had forgotten about in myself. There's filmmakers that actually, a filmmaker, the last feature I shot, who I've always admired, we're getting his next film ready in the Yukon. And, it's been great to find challenges narratively and filmmaking wise where I feel like by becoming a cinematographer, I'm not only serving a film that I believe in and helping a filmmaker that I can enhance, but it's also challenging my skills. It's like two brains are better than one sometimes, and it's
Yeah.
fun to see stuff that's ambitious and different. At the same time, I just my fiance woke me up with a dream 2 weeks ago last Sunday, and within 7 days, I had a 96-page script. So I'm also, really enjoying writing and creating.
Yeah.
I think directing's really tough. Trying to get your films made is really tough. It's brutal. I mean,
Sure. Yeah.
as everyone
Yeah.
knows. And so to find this way back to cinema that's not commercials, because commercials, it's like there's great things about commercials, but it's like being intimate with a prostitute instead of someone you love. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
it's not intimacy. It's you're not making love the same way
Yeah.
and that you do when you create narrative. And so to be back in narrative and serving cinema again is great. And I find that it's really revitalized the director side of me too, because I feel like I can be a part of film and feel free to develop my work, to feel free to discover what it is I want to create next, the way I want to create it, because that film doesn't have to pay for my food. I can shoot a movie, I can make a commercial. And so now, like in the Breathless way, I can be free again. And I see already in the things I've directed in the last few months the difference that that's creating for me.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, that's pretty special. And you're suddenly working with a really interesting cast of performers too, putting Richard Gere and Uma Thurman, and then Kevin and Kira,
Yep.
in your Connaissance that's in post now, right?
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
finished the color on it.
That is also seems to be an extraordinary shift that it sort of changes the nature. I'm curious how it changes the nature of filming now, working with people who are such
It's
seasoned
He froze a little
no.
bit.
perform.
He'll come back. You froze.
That
Did I freeze?
Yeah.
Oh,
Just,
but
it
you've
was
I think right at the end perfectly of your question,
good.
honestly.
Good. Then I'll
It's
just let you answer whatever you heard.
it's all right, weird things about movie stars I didn't realize till I did these films. They look different. Like
yeah.
I really understand now how you can put a lineup and how a movie star pops. Like Richard Gere burns magenta. You put three people on camera and Richard Gere's one of them, he's redder than everyone.
Huh.
We had to do all this makeup testing to make him look dead because he was red no matter what you did. He looked alive, like he's so virile. It was like
Wow.
inspiring to see. And it's funny, Kevin burns green. Kevin Bacon in a seat is
Yeah.
greener than everyone. Everyone has their thing. It's interesting. Like Kevin has smaller features. You can put an 18 millimeter right in that guy's face. Richard Gere, it's funny. We would do these makeup tests. I loved working with. I have to say, it's like if I have the opportunity to go on and be part of more great cinema, like so much of it will be from what I was able to witness and absorb just being around him and his energy. The calmness, the regalness at which he attended thing, but also the openness, the hard work.
Hmm.
I had never seen an actor take the authority of a director to a role. I think that's the big difference on the level of talent, that they own their character in a different way.
Yeah.
And they come and talk to you, not like, what are we going to do? But they come talk to you about what their character needs are. I remember I would go to the makeup test just to look at Richard. I just wanted to see how light hit his face, and just get those hours that you can't get watching Pretty Woman.
Right.
You got to see it. And, I'm sitting there just silently in the corner waiting, and they're putting makeup on, and he stares and he looks at me. He goes, "Oh, I heard Paul told me all about you. I'm so excited to work with you. How you going to light it?" And I was like, "All right, Richard, let's go." And I told him, and it was my intention at the beginning. I was like, "Richard, I see what you're trying to achieve here. I'm going to give you light all the way to shadow in every frame of your sequence. And you can decide in every frame what you reveal. You want to hide it, you want to be vulnerable. That is the tool I can give you, and that is the tool to help your performance." And that's where our relationship began. And it was great talking to him about the character, talking to him about these things, having him ask questions. It was like, it's, you're there because you want to achieve something, right?
Sure.
And to see that from that level of talent was really inspiring. So Richard was great. Jacob was really amazing too, as well. Like, to deal with like
Oh yeah, Jacob
the
Elordi coming off
same
of
movies.
Saltburn too, right?
Yeah, but before, the Saltburn trailers were coming out while we were shooting, Priscilla premiered at the New York Film Festival. Like, we were kind of like right there as it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
taking off for him. And to see that kind of, again, that movie star energy, but in a younger package. And again, my generation, so someone I could connect to in a different way. And it was interesting to see the same things, but just in a different spin, just because, like Richard Gere has been on sets forever. That guy can hit a mark like no one I've ever seen, like a micro mark. Like, you tell
Yeah.
him a millimeter, he can hit it. Like, it's crazy. And Kevin Bacon was like the most intuitive person I've ever seen with a camera. I did a lot of scenes with him handheld, and it was amazing to watch him shift his performance timing with my movement so that he timed. I had to surrender after a while to see how he would time his lines with me as
Hmm.
opposed to me timing myself with him. And it was an interesting dance that formed. And so, again, if you stay open, you know, what is it? The actors are so interesting because they learn filmmaking from a first person point of view. Like, think about it, like a
Yeah.
director, a cinematographer. We film someone's experience, then we show it to them how we
Yeah.
saw it.
Right.
And
Right.
so they
Right.
see lights, they see cameras, and they all come at it at a different angle. And I love creating the environment where those itches can come out, where you could see them scratch, when you could see them and you can challenge those skills. Like with
Mm-hmm.
Kevin and Kira, they do a lot of TV, and I was talking to the directors like, let's do our wonders, let's challenge them, like let's make them act, because they do enough work every day that if we don't challenge them, like, what will this be?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It'll look
Which,
exactly like everything else they do.
yeah. Well, and I imagine that's, you know, nice for them to have people thinking about that while they're on set, not just, okay, let's just set it up and shoot it, but really processing that. And because that gives them an opportunity to be pushed, which, can lend to them bringing more to their performance. And I think that's very exciting.
And more to an audience,
And
because
more,
again,
yeah,
it's
more to
that
an audience, right?
connection, it's that
Yeah.
distance, it's creating that connection.
Yeah. Another interesting element with O Canada that I'm curious about is, obviously we've mentioned the actors, but was there any, because Richard Gere is playing the older version of Jacob Elordi, or vice versa, were they also watching each other and using and did you end up having to use some of the same techniques from one to the other in order to kind of wrap those story elements up?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. How do you capture age?
Oh, it's really interesting. And also in Height's another one, because Richard's like 5'9", 5'10", and Jacob 6'4".
7, 8. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
And
It's
so
a tower.
and I was like, and Paul got all freaked out. I was like, well, Paul, good thing Richard's in a wheelchair half the movie. Like that'll buy you,
Yeah.
that'll buy you something at least. But it was. I have a theory. Colleen, my partner, makes fun of me for this, but I love it. I call it the salsa theory. I feel that we are now become so media savvy that a monostylistic film doesn't work because we're all familiar with the styles, like doing something all in one shot, doing something all handheld, doing something all in close up. There's no achievement in it anymore. Just like there's no
Sure.
achievement in creating sci-fi because AI can do it. What's the achievement when everyone can do it easily? And so, oh man, I totally got lost in that. What was I talking about a second ago? I got so excited. Oh, we were talking about.
Richard Gere
Capturing
and Jacob
age,
Elordi.
yeah, across time and height.
Oh yeah, and height. And so, anyway, whatever I was going to, but a lot of it was, so sorry. Yes, now I know. The source theory, it's about creating stylistic conflict. And I knew the height issue was coming, and I knew we had all these time periods. So for me, it was about creating a language that would constantly create contrast with itself, like a good salsa, which are 3 ingredients, not 100, like it's tomato, onion, jalapeno. And so when I looked at the film, it was trying to figure out how to create that balance. So part of that was with Richard. I used my personal lenses. I have a set of old Zeiss B speeds like Kubrick used, like they used on Taxi Driver. That uh, I've owned 4 sets throughout the years, and I've built like 2 super sets, and I've uncoated them, and I've had them rehoused. They're my children. No one uses them but me. They don't get rented. And I was like, well, if you're going to kill Richard Gere, how do you not kill him on your lenses? And and because I wanted it to be personal,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
so I really tried to make a present for him. We use a square aspect ratio, more 50 millimeter, more just letting it be his face. Because Scott Hirsch and the makeup team did such amazing work, also of showing you Richard so many different ways, that I just wanted that square to let the faces live in it. Paul doesn't like movement, so it was a great challenge for me blocking the scenes to be like, all right, if I can't move the camera, how do I move the actors? How do I start doing that Antonioni Godard stuff where they start to dance with each other? That's how I can trick him into movement. And as our schedule got shorter, camera movement and some of those dolly shots that are invisible became the only way to do it. And what was cool was we did this film in 17 days, so having to be so. Oh, I love it because no one can
Yeah.
catch you, and you
Yeah.
have to react. You
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
be alive with the actors, and so that was my intention with Richard. Is if you're living a lie, even though you've succeeded, it's cold, it's hollow. But at the same time, he was in this old, almost church that was reclaimed. So the first word that came to my head was mahogany, warm wood. So I thought cold world, warm wood, square face, old, hollow, end of life. But I used these softer lenses because I also, again, wanted to contrast the romance of it. And
Mhm.
Jacob and Richard's funny. We do these makeup tests. And after the third one, I'm shooting Richard with a 50 millimeter. Under my breath, I go, man, the 50 is really your lens. And I didn't realize I'd said it out loud. And he looks at me and goes, no, you're right. He's like, you really can't use anything else. It doesn't look right. He's like, maybe a
Wow.
35.
Yeah.
And he was right.
Yeah.
He was right. It was crazy on set. It just, he didn't look like Richard Gere unless you shot him with a 50 millimeter.
Isn't that
It
interesting?
That's
it blew my
crazy.
mind.
Yeah.
But then Jacob has this young face. He's long, he's tall. I tested. So, the past was where all the great stuff happens. It's the natural world. He's driving around. That's where I said anamorphic. It's
Mhm.
contradictory.
Sure.
You think square aspect ratio for the past film, like, but this is the sugar. This is the part of life he's savoring on his way, in that Jacob's ladder way as the demon angels are coming to pull it from him. This is what he's savoring. So I was like, Warren Paul's always loved the movie Fat City.
Oh.
So my thought,
Sure. Ugh.
and on YouTube, there's an amazing free edition. It looks better than the Blu-ray. It looks better than any transfer I can find. It must be some old print that was done terribly to DVD.
Huh.
And that became my guide for all the past sections. It had the right cyan, the right, again, shot deck, all of it. It doesn't look right. Whatever this YouTube one is with the yellow sky, the blue shadows, it really got me. I tested every anamorphic lens I could find, but all this old junk looked like I could see the lenses, not the people. It was all like flares. It was all, like all this shit, all this,
Right, yeah.
indulgence. But this was a movie about people. I went to my good friend Andy Shipsides at Ari Rental here in New York. They had just been building a set of lenses. They took this modern set of Zeiss anamorphics, the master anamorphics, and they expanded them to full frame. And Andy, being an artist himself, added a little funk in there when he did it. And I saw these lenses. I'm like, ooh. And I don't know how much you know about lenses, but like anamorphic, it's like Wes Anderson uses a 40 millimeter a lot, and when he does, you see the curve.
Yes.
It's hard to get wide close, but this 32 millimeter alpha lens that Ari had built, I was putting diopters on it. I would get in the trailer that they just put out, there's this handheld scene with Jacob, and that I'm like probably 18 inches from him the entire scene.
Wow.
And his face could take it. And so I really tried to contrast this Bergman like poetry in the present with this faded anamorphic wide angle, but classic, still in the Paul world, but using lenses in that different way. And then we had all this other random shit of different time periods, of different ages of Richard. And I was like, oh God, like everyone's gonna get slaughtered. Makeup, production design, doing 20 time periods. And that was part of what motivated me towards black and white and suggesting it.
Gotcha.
Sure.
I thought it had a real practical utility, but also I thought emotionally, okay, this is a filmmaker in his life. And I was like, oh, this is fun because then we can use the language of cinema. Black and white allows you to light in that different way, to light with contrast. So, I could do the 50s in this kind of Wells way. I could do the 2000s in this Bergman way. And I could use kind of the language of different black and white cinema to again tell these parts of his life. So that's how I tried to capture age, by making it a kaleidoscope, and hopefully by creating enough contrast between scenes and images that you get lost in the contrast and you don't notice the height difference and all these other things that we didn't have going for us.
Wow.
That's amazing. And just like I have I watched the trailer. I've got it playing right now again, and I get it. Like I totally get it. I don't think I had let go of the fact that there's a shot in the trailer of him sitting in looks like a police station, and his legs seem to go on forever, like they're breaking the frame down. But I don't get any other sense that he is. I don't get a sense that they're not, part of the same being. That's incredible.
There was one scene. We had a lot of match cuts that didn't make it past shooting because we would set it up with like all these boxes, and you'd be like, oh, And so there was this one shot. It's in the clip. It's Richard walks towards the camera, and then the camera pans and becomes. And Paul had this match cut. He was like, "How are we gonna do this?" I'm like, "Paul, old cinema, easy.
Yeah.
We pan him. Richard walks out of frame. Jacob walks in. It'll feel like magic, because the audience doesn't know what's outside of frame.
Been doing that since the 30s. Yeah, right.
And I remember Paul looked at me. He got quiet. He looked at me and said, "You know what, Andrew? That's such a good idea. It makes up for all your annoying ones." And then he brought the whole crew over and said the same thing to them. And that was like every day with Paul Schrader. I'd be like, "Paul, what if we get this? Can we try this?" He'd be like, "Why would I do that? Are we gonna do this?" I'd be like, "Paul, it's just the Chinese menu. You could pick whatever you want."
Yeah.
Right. Here's the menu.
I've just got a lot of dumplings, or today maybe it's a soup.
You're right. Oh man.
Well, it totally explains why you picked the movie that you picked today.
Yeah.
Speaking of 18 inches away from Jacob Elordi, that camera is in the face of these people.
Yeah.
Oh God. In just a wheelchair. You know?
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Do you know the mail cart story with the opening?
Let's.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, let me. No, you're totally fine. Let's use this opportunity to shift our conversation to start talking about Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, the film that you brought today. So, so tell us the mail cart story. Let's talk a little bit about the behind the scenes, how things were getting made here.
Oh, a good famous one that I always love is that, there's a New York Herald Tribune, she's walking down the avenue and, Michael comes up to beat her, and they're walking down the avenue, and Godard wanted to be invisible. So Raoul Godard, a war cameraman coming onto the film, they took a postal service cart, covered it, and they put him in it, and they just cut a slot for the lens and one for his eyes, and they had so all that on the Champs-Élysées,
Yeah.
it's just a mail cart and just them walking in traffic.
Well, she's trying to hawk newspapers.
Exactly. And that's and that's a vibe. This was a film I went to film school. I probably saw it in film school, and I knew about Godard. I knew he was still alive. And now I like regret it so much that I had all these years where he was on the earth that I didn't understand it. But I had made my film Feral, which you mentioned Undercity before. So about 10 years later, I made a narrative in the same tunnels about a homeless woman in her last days leading up to a blizzard. Came out a few years ago, and I really wanted to be free. I really, the first day of shooting, it just went so bad. The first 6 hours, and I was just like, oh God, my life's over. This is it. This is everything. And during that lunch, I remember sitting on the floor of this empty apartment, eating my cold Chinese food, coincidentally, and I said to myself, all right, I need to do something different. This is a little movie. I'm just going to embrace what's good. I'm just going to embrace whatever's good. I'm just going to embrace. I'm not going to worry about my weaknesses. And suddenly the movie started to make sense. I cut about 30 pages of the script as we filmed. We kept finding new stuff. We kept going. I'm editing it. I'm wrestling with it. I'd never really done a feature on my own this way. And so I'm getting, close to what I think's the edit finish line. And if I'm like, all right, got to show it to Papa, I bring it to Paul. I go to his house with his wife, Mary Beth, and I show it to him. And they love it. They love the performances. And Paul, at the end, we're having dinner. He looks at me. He's like, if you're going to do all that French New Wave shit, you should just do it. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, all the Breathless shit. If you're doing it, just do it. Make it a puzzle. Like, don't have to, just do it. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I literally, I feel dumb as, admitting that in my 30s, as a cinephile, but I didn't know. I was like, I just didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I went home and I put on Breathless. I was like, fuck me. I was like, holy shit, this guy did it.
Yeah.
This guy did it. And it struck me, and it really struck me. But, I was finishing a film, so it struck me, but it kind of stayed in my database. I showed it to my editor. I was like, oh, wow, someone's going for what I've been trying to figure out. That's cool.
Yeah.
But I just, there was other stuff. There was this world shutdown and other things that kind of distracted me from what I had learned in that moment. And, 2 years ago, Godard passes away. And I went back to the theater. They were playing it in film form in 35, and I went to see it, and it struck me again. And like the Beatles, I just lost myself to Godard. And it's been about 2 years of just being lost in the catalog. I've gone on the way to Cannes. I went on a pilgrimage to his studio. I've met his DP. Wow. I found something, I found something I haven't been able to find anywhere else. I found an attitude, a freedom, and as I started reading his criticism and I started reading again how he worked, I was like, oh, wow, because there's a quote he often used that really strikes me, I think shows this film, and it shows a lot about his work, which is that an artist is someone who takes the world and turns it into a portrait of themselves. And I think for me, that was from what I've done with the camera, what I've done immersion wise, what Godard really opened up to me was how the personal can become so invisible the more you give yourself to it. It's not about writing yourself as a kid, but it's about infusing yourself so vulnerably inside of it. And in a way, it's what I also love is that, everything's documentary, right? Everything's documentary. If you use a camera, you're documenting someone, whether it's a car accident on the street or two people playing dress up. It's documenting a moment, and that moment becomes a time capsule forever of that moment.
Sure.
And to see this, and the French New Wave started, it's a treasure of discoveries. Because with that attitude, he discovered things. He was using things, he had ignorance. He hadn't made a film. He was a critic. but bustling with ideas. Like when you see Wells with Citizen Kane, someone who just had the right ideas at the right moment, with the right people.
Well, and he's I mean, the French New Wave, I just had a whole conversation about that over on the CinemaScope podcast. So it's fitting that you picked this, with me having just watched this and a whole bunch of other French New Wave that's very fresh in my mind. But it's such an interesting group of people, all of them pushing so many interesting ideas, breaking away from the staid, expected way that the French industry was making films that they found incredibly boring, and they wanted to try infusing it with new directions, new life, new ways to use the camera, new ways to edit, new ways to integrate your actors in the space they're in with the way that the camera is moving as well. And I think that's what's so interesting about this. And just like it, rewatching it for this, it was I was reminded yet again how funny it is that the very first thing we see or we hear is Michelle saying, "After all, I'm an asshole." And you're kind of like, start the movie off with that, and you're getting this sense of like, oh, okay, this is the guy I'm going to be following for the next hour and a half. Where am I going to be going? And just like giving us something that feels already just so different. And he, it's not very long after that, he's looking right into the camera as he's driving, and like, and we're getting something that felt so different. And I think that was, we saw a lot of that with all of the French New Wave, but this film, I think there's a lot of that Godard was really playing with.
It's so fake, it's real, and I think there's a beauty to that. And I think, what's important with the French New Wave is that they loved cinema and they saw what they loved dying, and they came to it with new energy to save it. I think we give the 70s in America way too much credit on its influence of a cinema. Because, I mean, think about it. What did they really do? They just industrialized and commercialized European cinema from the 60s. And you go, and you go back to 1960 and think you have Breathless, Pickpockets, Psycho, and Peeping Tom all come out the same year.
Yeah, right.
10 years after existentialism. Sartre, the end of the 40s, just blows up the world with existentialism. And 10 years later, we see the first people wrestling with the ideas of psychology, internal monologue, motivation, and actually wrestling with it. It's like Bertolucci. Bertolucci's the son of a poet who didn't want to do poetry to be in his father's shadow, so he picked a new art form. These people were solving problems. They were answering questions with a form they didn't understand by punching their way through it. They weren't taking images of images. They were taking images of the world. And I think what the 70s began, which is the cancer we're stuck with now, is taking images of images and thinking that's as good as actually answering questions about the natural world.
Well, the movie seems to have, I mean, to your point about being so fake it's real, it seems to have a propulsive nature to it, as if they collectively were so immersed in getting their messages out that they didn't care to take time to do the things that cement modern blockbusters as blockbusters. The violence is just skipped frames. We get people hit by cars that aren't hit by cars. We see them off. It happens off camera, and then we suddenly see them and they're lying on the ground. But we don't have time to see them because we have to get to this like 15-minute straight conversation about how badly this guy needs to sleep with her and how much she does not want to give him the time of day right now, and eventually relents. It is extraordinary that is given so much space to breathe, and we're in bed with these people, and the stuff that we are focused on now, how critical we are of the action in movies and how much time and space we give action in movies, that it felt like Godard just didn't care about. He was like, that's not the important part.
Oh, and do you know the story of where the jump cuts came from? Do you guys know this one? Or the
go ahead and say it.
It's why you're here, Andrew. Teach us.
It's just it's so silly, but so good, which is that, so the first cut of the film is 2.5 hours long. You can read all of it. Richard Brody,
Yeah.
Richard Brody's book is just incredible. Everything is cinema. It's just incredible. The stories and all, there's a lot of great books, but Richard Brody's is really good. Uh, and part of a lot of what they talk about is that Truffaut wrote an outline, Godard wrote a script, and then he got the set, he threw it away, and he improvised every day. He just made it up and kept going. He would write the lines in the morning if the actors could memorize them, because it's all out of sync sound. They dubbed it later. And the first cut was 2.5 hours. And the producer was like, no, we have to deliver a 90-minute cut. And he went to Melville, Army of Shadows Melville, who plays the author in the film amazingly. And Melville's like, oh, you just got to cut some of the scenes. You got to cut out the stuff that doesn't matter. And Godard just was like, I'm
Okay.
not doing that.
Oh no.
He made it breathless. Instead of cutting out scenes, he cut out all the dead moments. And it's something that really strikes me, and I think we forget about when we use the jump cuts now, we forget the intention is that, like, what is cinema? Is cinema the story in your head? Is cinema the storyboards? And I think for some of us, cinema is like, I went punching every day, and this is the best 90 minutes I came back with. And I think there's a certain ferocity. I think Scorsese also does this well, which is like being so focused on performance and energy that anything that takes away from that, like the time it takes for a gunshot to happen, or there's a scene where Michael's going to steal a car, and you see the guy walking behind him, and they cut right before he says anything. It's like, you don't need the scene.
Yeah.
Richard Brody talks a lot about how it's an action film in the way that Godard felt momentum. The momentum of filmmaking is part of the film, and they made it in a breathless way. And again, it keeps coming through. It's funny, I mentioned that festival in Rome, New York, Capitol Fest. Amazing. If anyone's in the New York area, it's a 1928 original movie palace. They bring these prints in every year. It was incredible, but it was fascinating because, what is it? These are the films from the 60s are old films to us, but to them in the 60s, the old films to them were the films of the 20s, right?
Yeah, right.
And so it was a real treat after all this Godard to see the films that he would see in an innocent way. And, it's interesting. You see these old prints and you see all the repairs in the prints of them making the old, all the splices that fix the errors. And it was funny. And that was the first time I saw the same jump cuts, and you're like, and again, it's like, it's so funny how these things throughout time change things. Like Godard like Warhol, I think Godard wore out his welcome in culture. And there's like a dark spot in culture, where you see like people start to get cynical on him. He was around too long. And I hope that now that he's passed, it will allow us to kind of let go of the 100 later movies he made that are, for the deep heads like me, and realize that, I know it's like when you copy Malik, when you copy these images, you've already failed because these images didn't come from an idea in someone's head. They came from intention and reacting. They were just picking cafes. They were walking down streets. They were coming up with lines. Like those things came from the universe talking to each other. I really believe it. It's like when you think that what's in your head is better than what the world puts in front of you, that's just narcissism. It's not art. And the people create great art that way. But, to find a kindred soul who knows that it can be the opposite and fought so ferociously to take like the intelligence of Bergman and the freedom of Cassavetes and kind of cut it together in this new way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, there was a point in the film where there's like the president coming through France, right?
Yeah, Eisenhower.
And that was like just there. And so they just decided, hey, let's just use it. We'll just integrate that into, part of the story. And so that's kind of that same thing where they're just like, this is what's going on. Let's just grab it while it's happening.
Yeah. And it's the beauty because again, all cinema is a time capsule, right? And so when you let moments be alive, then you capture something for all of time. It's like, I was just in Paris after Cannes. Literally, oh my God, Colleen, I dragged her around. I was finding every location I could from these movies to just see them now, just to walk by them. And
Yeah.
you know what? It doesn't, that the French New Wave doesn't exist aesthetically because 60s
No. Yeah.
Paris doesn't exist
Right.
anymore. And
Yeah.
it's like, and so this is the time capsule of life. And that's where I say again, it's like we need filmmakers now to tell stories of life as it is today, because these are the records of this time. Again, is it going to be the capitalists? Is it going to be the tweets? Or is it going to be the narratives that we allow another generation to fall in love with that says, okay, you can live with compassion. You can live in this world. This world isn't burning. You have a lifetime here. So how are you going to live it? And those are the things I see in Breathless and I see in these 60s films from Godard, which is how are you going to live in a world that's falling apart? How do we live in a world that doesn't meet our ideals? Who are we in this world? You know, and and those are the questions I believe we have to ask today, even though if you recopied any frame of this today, it would have no relevance. The attitude, the intention, the spirit, can still guide us as we create in this present moment.
I that is this movie makes me think on that reflection in particular, especially this idea that the people who can resonate the most with these movies are the people who were on the street walking up and down with the mail cart, right? Like these were the people who lived that experience, and their historical view of it is going to be something they can appreciate over time. The people who are in charge of making movies now aren't walking the same streets, and that's sometimes why I feel we get a disconnect from the stories that we're getting now, the biggest stories, because the people who are bankrolling most of the movies anymore are not the people who would push a mail cart with a camera in it.
It's happened before, like exactly, and I think you beautifully say it because it's like it's happened in the world before. It's like the 50s were the same way. It's like we've had these areas of time where over-industrialization has made us lose faith in the form. Now, cinema in those periods had the advantage of being town hall. That's what we've
Yeah.
lost, and that's the scary part. It's like seeing these films from the 20s. It's everything had to be a movie to be communicated. The news had to become a movie.
Yeah. Right.
Musicals had to become a movie. Everything had to be a movie to be presented. And that peaked, unfortunately, probably somewhere in my childhood when these aspirations took hold. Uh, you know,
Yeah. Right.
and 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 now we're in this new chapter. But what will be those things? And it's like, is it about budget? Is it about attitude? It's like, I think sometimes we have more people that want to make movies than want to watch them. And that's the scary part too. But on the flip side, it's like, in another way, it's beautiful. It's only bad if you worry about making money. It's good when it comes to art. It's good when it comes to consumer. It's good. It's just unfortunately, it's again 20 years ago. I'm in an office with Paul, watching him run into the room, go, this whole world's becoming more work for less money. And that was 20 years ago, and it's just become more so. It's like the world doesn't end. I mean, our Todd in the 20s talks about the sky falling after the plague in France, and everything
Right.
they say in the 20s and 30s. It's just things just become more so.
Yeah.
Are there? I mean, the French New Wave is so often touted as something that's been so influential in so many different ways through film. And I mean, Godard, as you said, I mean, lived a very long life. And I know, like, we're talking about this film specifically, but going like, do you feel like when you watch films that are playing today, like, are there any filmmakers who you're feeling like, oh, there's something that they're doing that's really interesting, that's starting to push some of those bounds that I'm looking for?
God, have you seen this My First Film on movie? Have you heard of this? Oh, what's
No,
her?
No.
it's a
Let me
film
pull
called
her
My
name
First
up.
Film.
My First Film.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the director's name is Zia Anger. It just got released on movie.
Okay.
Um, Blew my mind. It's about a woman who tried to make her first feature 12 years ago. It's kind of the story as a narrative of what went wrong, as well as her reflections now. Um, it just took the meta narrative and the female narrative to a place that really struck me, that felt new,
Okay.
that really captured me. And it was the first movie in a long time that I regretted not seeing in the theaters. It
Yeah.
was I couldn't I couldn't get tickets at the Roxy screening where they were doing the Q&A, and so I watched it at home, and I'm glad because I got to show my partner, but I missed it, so that really got me. The Beast was amazing with Leah Sado this year.
Oh,
I think movies are getting better. Like I think good stuff's happening. I don't,
Yeah.
I look at it as it's a Bonello's film, The Beast with Lea Seydoux. It's incredible. Criterion just released it. I saw it at a festival months ago. It's full of ideas, and that's all I'm looking for. Is what are films that are full of ideas?
Yeah.
Because that's what I love about cinema. Again, there's stuff that people love about other stuff, but that's really what I'm looking for. I'm going to do a Q&A at the Roxy for Good One this weekend, which is another film, which is a great example of a little film that could, made in a few days in upstate New York about a really sensitive issue. So I think these films are happening. I think the problem is more it's like, I felt like, again, when the digital revolution came, there was this moment where they were trying to tell us all we had to figure it out. We had to figure out distribution, we had to market, we had to do this and that. And it's kind of true, but I don't know. I go to LA and I go to a party for a film, and there's 8,000 publicists and business people there. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah.
I don't see filmmakers at these parties. And so there's tons of people working on that. And I've really just come to terms with, if we're going to save cinema, the artists have to be focused on saving cinema, and all we can do is just make the sausage. We have to make the best sausage we can right now before the robots come and make, chopped cheese or whatever they're going to make. But we have to make great sausage. And there's a whole, and being at these festivals, being the distributors, meeting the people, programmers, it's like we're in this together because they're the sellers. And so if they can't figure out how to get the best sausage to the consumer, then the best sausage just doesn't get made anymore.
Yeah.
That's what we face.
Yeah, right. On one of our other shows, The Next Reel, we just talked about the film Chameleon Street. I don't know if you've seen that one, but that was it's watch it. It's an amazing example.
Please watch it.
It's an amazing example of a filmmaker really playing with the form, and it was a fascinating story about a con artist. And it was the only film that he ever made. He won the big prize at Sundance, but then never was able to get anywhere after that. It's kind of tragic because it's such an amazing film. So
and
check that one out if you get a chance.
Too. Yeah, that's like wow. That's like Angst. Have you ever seen Angst, the Austrian film? Oh, it's the most horrible. It's probably the most. It's like, I think it's the closest to true horror cinema's gotten. I really love it. It's also a director's only film.
Is this the 1983 film?
Gerald Cargill?
Crazy looking guy.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to check that one out too.
Oh yeah,
it was on Mubi recently, which is cool.
Yeah,
I like Mubi. They always have the weird stuff. They have a lot.
They're great.
Such weird
they're
stuff.
great.
Yeah, but they have but there's Godard. I can't find anywhere else but Mubi. And a lot of the Godards go
Movies
away,
We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of podcasts. The music is Chong Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.
Yeah, and it's very messy, and it's hard trying to track stuff down. So yeah, I if I like something, I try to get a physical copy of it so I can hold on to it, because who knows what's going to happen? You never know these days.
No, it's crazy, right?
Yeah,
I like rolling the dice. I like getting only digital so that one day I wake up and just see what movies have they taken from me today.
That's right.
What's just been just stripped from my library. Oh well.
Right? Yeah, it's funny that you could purchase something and then have just them take it.
Yeah, right.
The cold hands.
You didn't really own it,
over.
right? Hey, I have to ask you, especially since you worked with Richard Gere on O Canada, but what are your thoughts on the remake of Breathless from the 80s?
Oh man, have you guys seen it?
Yeah, I love it. I actually really love that.
It's my friend Alex Peterson. I hope he hears this. He's my other Godard friend. He also very much likes it.
Yeah.
It's a wild energy. It's like definitely someone got a different brief. I just love the audacity of it. I love that it exists, that anyone would try to do it. That they didn't do the Psycho Gus Van Sant route and they just went like Neon Demon with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's crazy, and I hadn't seen it. I just rewatched Breathless and the Godard version, and then I watched it. And I'm like, this might be the only way to actually do a remake of this, because they just went like, we're just gonna go totally 80s crazy. Like, it's a wild ride.
Movie.
Yeah.
It would be really funny if I had misquoted. And had came on ready to talk about that one.
Right?
Be the greatest curveball in cinema ever.
Oh, man.
I feel like you guys have totally ruined it for me, because now I have to go watch it. And what's the surprise now? It's 80s bonkers, 80s Richard Gere. That's like 8 a.m. Monday morning for me. I just bathe in that kind of Richard Gere.
Yeah.
I just watched Pretty Woman again. You know what's wild about it? Because it's like that. Have you, or if you want a great cinema story real quick, look up the original script for Pretty Woman. It's called $3,000. Have you ever heard of this script?
Yes.
I've heard the original title, but I haven't looked for the script.
Oh, it's available. It's a fascinating. I learned so much from filmmaking from the script, because I think it's a great example of how you have to go for the jug. The filmmaking process vanillas out everything, because all these people are involved by the end. And I really think it's important that when you write a script, you have to really go for your concept. You have to really hit it hard, because so much of it's going to erode. It's going to erode away. And $3,000 is a perfect example of that, because Richard Gere his character's just an asshole who picks up a coke whore and locks her in a bathroom till she's done going through withdrawal, and then takes her to dinner and dumps her on the street.
Wow.
And it kind of has the scenes in the movie in it, but it's
but
whoa.
They're walking backwards in a mirror. Like, it's not quite right.
It's so wild, and the ending's crazy, and it's just it shows you that Gary Marshall was a genius. Like, whoever just read that script and was like, oh, we could do this with it.
Right.
Was a genius. And that's what's amazing about film, right? It's not always the auteur. It's not always a great film can come from so many places. It's baffling sometimes.
Yeah, right. Then sometimes it's just sheer blind luck that it ended up turning out as good as it did.
Yeah. I think it's always sheer blind luck when it comes out as good as it did.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah. With so many things that can go wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah. And very few that can go right.
Yeah. No kidding. Well, Andrew, this has been such a fun conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about your career, all of these other tangents we've gone on, and of course, Godard's Breathless. We really appreciate it.
Okay, this is really great. It's great to be part of the beautiful catalog you guys have put together of artists, and I really appreciate you discussing one of my favorite films. I hope you guys got to enjoy it.
Well, certainly, thank you.
Thanks, man. This has been great.
Do you have any places online you send people to learn more about you or kind of check out what you're up to?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram now with the release of the film. I'm putting up a lot of stills and a lot of behind the scenes and little stuff I'm discovering. You follow me at Andrew Wonder on Instagram. Okay. Pretty much every social I'm Andrew Wonder on, except for TikTok, where it's Andrew Wonder TV. And also there's my website, which is wonder.nyc.
.nyc is a thing?
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow.
I know. That's how I felt when I got it. And
it does not sound like a personal account, wonder.nyc. That's a business of dubious intent, is what I hear.
Come take the Silk Road on the way.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, those are two great places to find me. But yeah, Instagram, I'm always down to talk about any of this stuff. I love teaching. If anyone has any questions about the process or Godard, it's the likelihood of any of us succeeding or making a great movie is 0.0000001%. And so the best thing we could do is actually support each other, because any of us making a great movie gives us all a chance to make great movies. And so anything I could do for any of the listeners out there, please, Andrew Wonder's here. Pleasure, and thanks again for having me today.
Well, that is fantastic. What a way to end it. Well, we will have all those links in the show notes, everybody. Again, we certainly appreciate you joining us here today. And for everyone else out there, we hope you like the show, and certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like.
Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chong Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.